We're privileged to be sitting here today in the old schoolhouse that, served the people of Bere Island way back to the 1850s, I believe. This was going into a school, and then kept going till over 100 years later, I think around 1970, until it was replaced with a new school. And so it's very fitting, I think, that it was ultimately turned into a unique heritage centre. So today we're trying to recall a lot of that heritage. My parents, of course, both went to this school, so I have some stories from them. And John's parents were both, of course, born here in Bere Island. His mother's people and his father's people were both great Republican families, and that will add a lot of colour to it, I'm sure, as we go forward. A lot of information on that. John himself, of course, always took a great interest in Bere Island history and the Bere Island culture and heritage and so forth. So we're really happy that he's here with us today. So maybe at the beginning I might kind of hog this a little bit, because my grandmother was born back in 1861. Now that's reaching back, going back kind of not far after the famine time. So whereas my mother and father and John's mother and father would have been born in probably the 1890s, somewhere in there. So their recollection of this wouldn't come into later years. My grandmother was born over in Ardra, and that of course was inside the Red Line. And John can explain maybe what Red Line means, but it had a lot of significance at that time. And then she moved to Ballinakilla and started raising her family there, I suppose, the 1880s, 1890s, I suppose. So she would have a great memory of all of this, and she was very great to impart all that on us as kids growing up. Some of it we should have listened more to her, I guess.
What did she tell you about when she was a child in the East End? There was a tower there that time, was there? Number One was called.
Number One, that's true. Number One was more over to the very East End, I guess.
Yeah. And there wasn't been any military there. It was 1897 when the day started.
Correct. She talked very much about that, about the big build-up and the decision by the Admiralty, I guess, and the British government to defend the harbour, which was by that time becoming almost home port for the big British fleet. And so that meant Bere Island was to be fortified at both ends so they could defend the harbour. She talked a lot about that because of her family being still in the East End, of course, and visiting. And then it was an international news wave, because it was talked about as being almost another Gibraltar, in other words, this great build-up. And it really did head that way for a while. She talked about the building of the batteries, of course, at both ends. And what went with that, of course, you have batteries, you have living quarters to go in, you have gun emplacements, and landing places and all that for the boats. And the cutting, of course, in the East End was something that she talked about. That was a major thing at that time, cutting that with probably chisel and hammer over the rocks.
Yes. And they used to wheel up the stuff up on deals. There was no such thing as a heist. They used to wheel up the stuff out of it.
Out of that, my gosh.
Jim Coffey told me about it when he come home, when he come to join us, he used to back up.
That tired, oh my gosh. Right enough, she did mention Jim Coffey was working there, would be a young fellow, maybe upper teens at that time, about 20 years old. But yes, she talked about the great employment that gave, really, at the time.
It was a boom for Bere Island. In fact, it spoiled it, really, because people were happy with their hoarding. They were self-sufficient, they had places and stuff, and they had plenty fish was everywhere.
Yes.
And all of a sudden they were getting a pay packet. And it spoiled them because they got used to the pay packet.
This is true. It did progress right up, I guess, to the first couple of decades of the century.
Oh, yes.
I'm talking about, this would be back around 1900, of course, and then even when it was all built several years later, there would be maintenance and crews in there and so forth.
The tower, of course, was taken down, Number One, and when I was a child and up to recently, when you need people in the East End, you'd ask them, how was everyone in Number One? Do you remember that?
I remember that, yes. See, my father had an aunt, Annie Mullins, and we heard of her always as little children as Annie Number One.
That's right.
Annie Number One. There was Number One tower, whatever, over there, I guess. My grandmother talked a lot about herself personally going out to the fleet, selling the vegetables
Oh, yes.
and milk and butter and so forth.
I think girls got jobs there. An aunt of mine was, if you please, a seamstress.
Oh yes,
And they
okay.
get jobs housekeeping. And
Yes.
there was a lot of island girls employed there too. And
Yeah.
they'd go to the fleet with eggs and butter and lace. And in the crossfair, Charlie Murphy, he had a drapery shop. And it was out there that the whole fleet would be there. They're all out selling stuff. And you'll get blocks of cocoa. We got one once in my house, I know everything of them. And tobacco leaves, they make up the tobacco. There's
Wind it themselves or
sprinkling
whatever.
rum or brandy or something, the leaves. And of course they get clothes as well. They get old uniforms.
They would, of course, yeah.
And they'd all visit the galley and they'd come away with something.
Plenty of food, probably somewhere inside their jumpers when they were home. Now you mentioned the fishing. My grandmother mentioned yes, the mackerel and herring and the seine boats and so forth. And she said there were times when the whole square in Castletown would fill up with barrels of salted fish, salted mackerel,
That's
salted
right.
herrings, heading for America. That was the main
Oh
industry
yes,
at that
and
time.
they come from the Isle of Man and from Scotland and all. Dan Dee told me, the old man, he said you could walk from Castletown across into the Inishes. There were so many boats.
So many boats, yeah. And it wasn't just out there only, over in Allihies. I heard this story, now believe it or not, when I was passing through New York. And Allihies, of course, they landed fish over there, and then they had a salting station over there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they'd be loaded onto the horse and cart, horse and buggy, and up and right into Castletown. So to lighten the load, I suppose, coming up Gower from the west, that's quite a pull. They actually they bored the holes in the barrel, let the pickle out. Imagine how the herring smelled when they opened the barrel in New York.
It was done away with in 1924 because America got took after their own
fishing
industry.
fleets, yeah.
So they stopped.
Probably
There
that's
was a
probably-
duty in them and they couldn't pay.
Yeah. So how much the pulling the plug contributed to finishing it off, I don't know. But anyhow, that was true. I remember my father talking about the school here where we were sitting and about it going to school with a slate and I suppose a chalk. No
Yeah.
copybooks, certainly was no internet, there was no
When I
tape
started
recorders.
school in 1933, it was a slate I got with a wooden frame and a sort of a slaty pencil.
Okay.
And you'd spit in it and rub your...
So you saw that actually.
I went to school in September. Then in the spring of the following year, 1934,
You got a copybook.
I got a copy of and the slate would
But
run away. Charlie McCarthy here was a great
he was a great teacher, no doubt.
teacher.
Yeah.
And in the East End you had Mr. Morton. There
Yes.
was a granduncle of mine there for some couple of months and he misbehaved. And it was Miss Morton got him, but I heard Fred Green talking about they had a score stick. If you spoke word of Irish, there was a
Oh boy.
the stick. You got a wallop for every mark that was in the stick.
Yeah, so Irish was totally
Oh,
taboo
no,
at that
yeah.
time, just
But then
can't speak
later
it.
on down, it was brought back again.
Yeah, even within the British time.
Yeah, yeah.
That's I can see that now because my grandmother did have Irish.
Oh, no,
Very fairly good Irish speech, and my father didn't. And then my mother, who was maybe a little bit younger than him, seemed to have more of the Irish, and it came back in maybe in the 1910s or
1922.
something like that. Yeah, we talk about people who did very well from here, and Captain Dane, that would be Patrick
Dane,
Burrows
yeah.
would say,
Up the
Uncle.
Strand, yeah.
He was captain of a ship. His brother was
I know.
fire department captain.
And your uncle.
My uncle Tim, yes, in the West End, and his
But
brother
then second
John.
uncle as well.
John too. They were all captains of ships. And that
He was
was
the captain of the biggest tanker out of Galveston. They landed in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, and when he went into the shipping office, the clerk there was a Crowley, whose people were from Bere Island.
from Bere Island. My gosh, how about that? Oh my goodness.
I think for a start, Captain Tim's Spanish was very good, he was good after that. But your man spoke in English,
Oh,
so Irish accent.
Bere Island accent. How about that? Small world. Now, in those days, of course, a lot of people went to America, and my grandmother and my father would talk about my Aunt Katie or Aunt Julia. Then the start off would be the Bere would come down from Castletown, I suppose, and they would row out and board the Bere right here in the harbour.
Half a crown.
Half a crown to Bantry. How about that? What a sad way to start off seeing them going
Yes.
off, and never any hope much of coming
But
back
like there
again.
were dying, really.
Yeah, it
They
was-
call it the American way.
or the American
They
way.
have a kind of a wake
Yes.
beforehand.
Yeah, that's it. So then, 2 or 3 days later, they'd be up on the hill lighting bonfires for the emigrant
liner, yeah.
who was on the ship passing west near the heads. Sometimes, if the day was clear, like today, they'd probably see them.
Yes, yeah.
You know, but and that was it. Oh my gosh, it was sad. Yeah, I remember the story about the fellow went up heading for the ship, made up to Cork, I suppose, and he was asking this policeman how to get to Queenstown, as they call it. But I asked him, said, where do you come from? I came up from Bere Island. He was going to Butte. This guy was going all the way to Butte, which was the destination at that time. He said, well, geez, if you came up from Bere Island or from Bere, you'll make it all right. The worst of the journey is behind you.
Martin was going to Butte that night. Martin died there.
Oh, God help us, yeah.
Martin died there. I was listening recently in the radio to all Kerry and Cork. The whole pile went to Butte, and the whole lot of them died.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was tough times on the, on the mines essentially. That's where they went down.
They claimed that when they'd come up off the mine, they'd have the 2 pints, and a lot of them delayed with their more,
gosh.
and they weren't eating properly.
That's true. Yeah, that is very
But
true.
anyway, the copperwood,
Yeah, yeah.
it was dry bone,
Oh gosh.
copperwood.
They, of course, when the mines, when would the Puxley's mines have closed down at that time around?
In the 30s, I think.
Was it? Yeah, that would be
Earlier.
That'd be later years. Well,
Yes.
they recruited a lot of Bere people.
Well, especially from Ellihayes. In fact,
yes.
one of the apostles of the Mormon church, there are 12 apostles, the really big guys,
Yeah.
and one of his grandfather was from Ellihayes. Being here at school and the way the faith was
Walloped into you maybe, if nothing else. But
the very first day we started the bless yourself.
you probably had a good start on it.
I
You might have-
escaped him, you see, when I came to the big classes.
Yeah.
He was gone.
Oh yeah,
He was a great teacher, but very cruel
yeah.
and a great friend of mine.
You was, of course. Yeah, he was a great neighbour. He really was.
My father told me when he was going to school, the last day, Charlie McCarthy was the teacher that him. I don't know what happened, but father ran up the hill and Charlie McCarthy could run to the teacher. He nearly got him at the top of Murphy's Hill,
Yeah.
but when father got to the level,
He was away.
he used to laugh at it.
How about that?
The first day I came to school, there was 109.
109
I don't know,
pupils.
I remember.
Yeah.
And the day I left, it was 54.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was down now. So then, World War One, of course, again, Bere Island
Yes,
really, figured very prominently because merchant fleet, I guess,
yeah.
merchant ships and stuff would all be into the harbour. They said, gee, that harbour would fill up here over the course of a couple of days.
Yeah.
And then they would be escorted, of course, across the Atlantic with the British fleet as in a convoy. There was no sense in going on their own
the
because
submarines,
the submarines were out there. So that was, again, brought Bere Island back into prominence. Towards the end, I suppose, the American fleet actually came to anchor here, use this as a port
Yes,
too.
and they'd
Towards
come
the end of the
ashore,
war.
they'd come ashore and they'd be looking for whiskey and they'd make 3 bottles out of one. The fella selling it to them.
Yeah, well,
And
yeah.
they won't need it.
What?
Like the church in town, that big church, they got several donations from British admirals and
Is that
captains
right?
and that sort of thing.
To
And
that.
that's why it's so big.
One thing, of course, anybody from Bere Island would be, kind of gravitate towards the sea. A lot of young men, I suppose, joined the British Navy and even the British Army. And
Before the First World War, they were recruiting a lot of them from Cape Clear
okay,
and all along the coast because they were good seamen.
yes,
And Jack Sullivan and Eugene, they joined 1908. They all joined around, say, 10 years or so. They were recruiting men to British.
for the British Navy
For the
and the
Navy,
British
yeah.
Army, I suppose.
A lot of them wouldn't join either. They only got 3 or 4. He was the only one in Green Island that joined
That stayed on.
Navy.
Yeah, Naval Reserve was a big thing.
They'd
Yes.
go to Kinsale. This is where, before the First World War. I think to sort of farm it, and they get, I know it's £10.
Big money at that time, I suppose.
But they'd get a uniform and boots and
That-
shoes,
that did you
which they could bring home with them.
Yes.
But that was not the worst.
Of course, yeah, of
And
course.
they talk about Jim Murphy there, Tim Mel's father. This was the very first day or two of the war. He went aboard, they'd bring him aboard ships and bring him away out to harbour. And when he came up the next morning, he was looking out as he thought of the mainland, he
Mainland.
wondered my landlord. And a sailor told him, he said, you're looking at Belgium, Paddy.
Oh my God, poor devil. I remember then, Danish we call him, would come up to the field to my father. He'd be coming up the second earth or whatever. He would draw out a big area there where describing how this battle was fought and how they held off the Germans and so forth. And my father, of course, had great interest because he had more, see the bigger picture. Yeah, Jack Sullivan, likewise. Oh, he was in
the 2 wars.
Yeah, he was in the army, I suppose. Was he?
No, in the Navy.
Was he in the Navy? Because I remember him. Gosh, he'd stop you on the road and he would tell you about how they would pin him down like in the front flank, and then they would outmaneuver him, come in from the left and right flank and so forth. And believe it or not, several decades later, I found myself out with the U.S. Marine Corps, out in the desert in California and Nevada, learning the same damn thing. I said, geez, if I listened to Dan Sullivan and Jack Sullivan, I'd be an admiral by now. Jack was very deaf, and it was probably maybe a wartime injury or whatever, And you'll remember this now. This old school here, some blackguards broke all the windows one time, And the priest, of course, was very concerned because he had to foot the bill at that time. So, oh gosh, the following Sunday he had a sermon and there was fire and brimstone flying. And I remember he wound up anyhow saying, and of course everybody in the church probably knew or suspected who did it, except the priest. He didn't know. He said, whoever did this, hope the Lord will soon chastise him. My father was coming up the steps in front of the church, and Jack Sullivan comes over to him. Jack was deaf, of course, see? And Jack says, Jim, God, he was mad, wasn't he? Did I hear him right? Did I hear him say, I hope the Lord will soon capsize them? Capsize was a buzzword for Bere Island, because everybody went out in a little boat.
Jack came to visit my grandfather in Bere Island one time,
yes.
The time of the Troubles, we call it. And there was a big American trunk, and he sat on it. He was in uniform.
Oh, yes.
Uniform.
Yeah.
The next thing, the Black and Tan surrounded the house.
Oh, wow.
And searched us from top to bottom. They never moved Jack. So when they were gone, my grandmother said to him, "Get up, Jack," she said, and opened the trunk. There was 7 rifles.
Oh my gosh, how about that?
Jack got an ace ticket.
Yeah. So leading up then to the War of Independence.
Of course. The people didn't take much notice until when they executed the 1916 man. And it was General Maxwell was in charge. Well, if the British government had been in charge, they wouldn't have executed him.
Nice. Is that
they
right?
would put him, we think, in
Prison.
And would have fizzled away out.
Yes.
But this fellow was a military man, brickling the splash, and they were all executed.
Oh my gosh. I heard that, of course, when I was in Dublin eventually, and some of the old timers there were very well up on that. And Dublin generally were anti what happened there.
Oh, they were anti, yes.
With regard to the rising, and then but when as the executions started taking place, they were changing over totally.
They changed over.
Totally anti-British then.
When the rising was on at the post office, one old man who'd been a Fenian, he was 82, and he was 2 miles from the post office, and he started walking with the legs gave out, and he bawled out crying. He wanted again to look down on the rifle at an Englishman.
Oh my goodness, how about that?
In Bere Island, it would take a while to filter through. It's newspapers that went by that time.
That's correct.
And the newspapers could be a week old, and my grandfather's house was a reading house.
I see.
The paper was read there, and down in the bottom of Bere Island, in Jack Harrington, Big John we used to call it, the paper, that was a reading house as well. But in my grandfather's house, it was the Cock-Free Press down below to be the people of some English paper.
Yes.
And of course the argument could get very heated, but in Bere Island the principal thing was to try and get arms, like I told you about Jack Sullivan.
Yes.
And my father told me one time he got a German rifle and there was a bullet jammed in it. So he stuck it out the window of the gable of the house.
Oh my gosh.
And put another bullet in and a fishing line onto the trigger and ordered grandma round the other column and pulled
it. Oh my.
He cleaned it. Some of the rifles